Hello there! There's a lot of iconic characters in Undertale. In fact, I'd say almost all of them are to an extent. How they are perceived, however, varies from person to person. For instance, I've learned from experience that if you suggest anything that could be interpreted as remotely negative about Chara, or Kara, or actually I'm not going to get into this again, you'll soon have a lot of angry Kara or Chara fans on your back. Well, today I've decided to take a look at a character who I feel is often judged unfairly by most players. It's understandable, really. You're never given much of a reason to emphasise with this character if you don't take a moment to really think about his backstory and lore. I am of course talking about King Asgore, the big, furry monster who rules over his kingdom, not with an iron fist, but with tender love and care. Finally, you just beat the final boss of Undertale, or so you thought. While Asgore makes for a strong opponent, you were no doubt expecting a little more. Well, what comes after soon makes up for that. If it's your first time playing, you'll no doubt feel compelled to kill Asgore when you consider what he has done. He may give you his sad life story as he kneels, wounded, but what does it matter how he feels, when you know he's killed 6 innocent humans for their souls? If you were like me on your first time playing, you considered sparing Asgore, but then decided the only proper course was to deliver justice and slay him. However, when that iconic slash effect appears on your screen, you see for just a split moment the King of Monsters smiling. Immediately you realise that his story was completely earnest. He's a broken, tragic character who realises his wrongdoings, even though he never had a choice but to carry through with them. So, how did it come to this? How did a monster who was once a committed pacifist end up being led down such a dark path? Well, to truly understand, we have to return to the beginning of the game. A long time ago, monsters and humans lived together in harmony. When war broke out for unknown reasons, the monsters were defeated and trapped underground. As we can see from the clip show, Asgore was their king even then. There's no mistaking his trident, the tiny crown, and his fearsome horns. Judging by how the humans are shown to be wielding swords and spears, we can determine that the monsters have been trapped underground for centuries, so when you reach the end of the game, it's very clearly modern day. How is that possible then? We know that because of monsters like Gerson, monsters age and die just like humans do. Well, there's one key distinction between boss monsters and normal monsters that allows for such a prolonged lifespan. Boss monsters only age when they have a child, as we know Asgore once did. Prince Asriel Dreamer was once the shining star of hope for the underground. He also meant everything to his parents, Toru and Asgore. Though his birth didn't mean they were closer to breaking the barrier, they finally had something to love and care for other than each other. With the knowledge we now have that Asriel was the one destined to break the barrier, had things continued like this, Asgore would have no doubt had a much less depressing life. Sadly, Asgore is one monarch who seems to have been cursed with bad luck. I've been over this story a dozen times before, so I'll keep it short. Asriel died in an attempt to break the barrier, using a convoluted plan he had schemed with his best friend Chara. Humans had once again snuffed out the hope that monster kind clung to. This led to Asgore declaring a second war on humanity. Of course, it wasn't an all-out war, as the monsters were still trapped, but he insisted on killing any human that fell underground, in order to obtain their soul to one day shatter the barrier with. Why did he decide to take such a drastic action then? Because his people had lost all faith and all hope. He really had no choice. It seemed as if the monsters would never escape the underground, and with the heir dead, Asgore knew his kingdom may very well wither away if he didn't promise an immediate solution. That solution was to acquire 7 human souls. Asgore was never brave enough to take a single soul and venture onto the surface himself. It's never quite explained why he didn't, but I always took it that he lacks the courage, or felt it would be wrong to actively hunt humans. This is evidenced by how Asriel felt when he was on the surface. Deciding to abandon the plan he had made with Chara, he instead ended up dying due to his reluctance to fight the humans who attacked him. Toru left Asgore after he declared war, believing in peace above all else. While she was quite within her right to do so, Asgore was the king. He couldn't simply tell his subjects that they should accept that they're doomed to forever stay trapped underground. He didn't want to collect the human souls any more than anyone else, but if he didn't, who would? No one else could step up to the task, a task which he knew was more than a little morally ambiguous, and one which his wife would never forgive him for. Clearly, however, no matter how grievous a decision it was, it had the intended effects. Monsters once again had hope. Even though Toru despised him for it, it seems Asgore won the love and affection of everyone else. An example of this is when you defeat Papyrus. He describes Asgore as a very polite and helpful monster, not someone to be afraid of or to revile. And that's the truth of it. Asgore is a good-natured soul deep down, though he was forced to commit an act not befitting of his character. Papyrus isn't the only one who clearly respects Asgore, so does Undyne, as he was her mentor. Though not just Undyne, look how upset Alphys gets when she reveals to you the truth of the barrier. The knowledge that you'll have to kill Asgore to escape clearly distresses her immensely. With the exception of Toriel, Asgore is a king beloved by all. He promises his subjects all he can, but deep down, he knows he's confronted with the impossible. So, when we actually fight Asgore, why does he remove our option for mercy? It does look extremely cool, but that's not the only reason. Asgore is well prepared to fight to the death. Not out of savagery or hatred, but because he's committed to following through what he promised his people. In his mind, if he can just defeat you and obtain your soul, finally he can shatter the barrier. In the long run, maybe the biggest source of misery in all of Undertale is that one barrier. If it never existed, the monsters would have never found themselves in such a predicament. Earlier I talked about emphasising with Asgore. Try and imagine being trapped in a cave your entire life. Oh, and to add to that, you live for centuries, and there's thousands of other people relying on you to one day free them. I imagine many of us would be prepared to do anything if that's what it took. Let's revisit the story he tells us as he kneels before us, dying. The truth is, he's sick of war. I don't think he was ever overly partial to it in the first place. His only wish is to see his wife and child, and he knows both things, particularly the latter, are now impossible. Therefore he's willing to surrender to you, to give you his soul so that the war ends for once and for all. It may be hard to understand at first, but I believe Asgore is one of the most heroic characters in Undertale. He was willing to sacrifice his dignity, his respect, and any chance he had at happiness, just to try and secure a future for his subjects being all of monster kind. And, from a purely practical standpoint, in the end he succeeded. If he had never taken the 6 souls prior to yours, the barrier would have never been broken in the end. It isn't easy to be king. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, even unpopular ones. I hope you found my opinion on Asgore to be interesting. I don't necessarily condone his actions, but as I mentioned near the beginning, I just can't help but feel a lot of people seem to really dislike him. But if you take into account everything that's happened to him, I can't help but find myself wanting to side with the big guy. Sadly, I'm still really quite unwell, though I'm slowly recovering. Once again, I'm sorry if I sounded a little off this episode. However, I thought this was a really intriguing topic to cover, so I wasn't going to let that stop me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.